This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you, Anne. Well, good morning, everyone. If I didn't meet you last week, my name's Andrew McCloud. I'm the tertiary ministry organiser with the Sydney Presbytery, so I spend most of my time working with young adults across our university ministries, so UNSW, UTS, Sydney University, and the Con, and I'm usually worshipping at Leichhardt Uniting Church. Okay, so let's get into it. So I'm going to tell you 4 short stories to start with. The year is 1933, and a young Lutheran minister at the age of 27 is on German radio. It's 2 days after Adolf Hitler has been elected Chancellor of Germany, and Dietrich Bonhoeffer is on radio speaking out against Hitler. The broadcast is cut off mid-air. Hitler rose to power with a massive support from the German citizenry, and many parts of the church welcomed his election. Bonhoeffer was a preacher and theologian, and in the course of his life he would study in the United States but return to Germany knowing the danger that awaited him. And he was even part of a conspiracy to assassinate Hitler, which ultimately failed. But while planning the assassination, he wrote about how he felt like he was sinning. And Bonhoeffer was eventually rounded up and placed in a concentration camp, and he was executed in the last month of the war as the camps began to be liberated. Dorothy Day of the Catholic Worker Movement was jailed after protesting in front of the White House in 1917 as a part of women's suffrage. She would be arrested many more times in her life. On December 1, 1955, Rosa Parks takes a seat on a bus in the coloured section. And when the whites-only section fills up, the bus driver asks her to move and to make way for a white passenger. She refused. And Leichhardt Uniting Church's very own Jesse Seacombe lays across train tracks to disrupt the construction of the Adani coal mine and our racing towards ecological catastrophe. So those are 4 short stories. Now, as a bit of a recap to last week, I talked about how we live in a society and an economic system which I think at its core has what I call, or what some of us might call, a lack of mindset. Capitalism sets this out pretty well. If economics is the idea that there is a limited number of resources that need to be distributed based on unlimited needs and wants, capitalism is the mindset saying, there isn't enough for everyone, so we'll just see who comes out on top. Our culture, society, and economic system set us up with ways of thinking about the world that become ingrained in how we understand and interact with it. And this filters down into the way that we think. And we can become easily stuck and think that anything else than what we know is either impractical, impossible, or maybe even immoral. But Jesus is constantly calling us to free ourselves from what is the way of the world and freeing us into a new way of thinking. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. If the church is going to be resurrection people, that is, people who truly believe that Jesus died and physically rose up again from the grave, then surely we are called to be people of vision as well. And if we aren't going to be full of enough hope, of enough love, of enough imagination to cast a vision into the world of what it could look like, then what is the point of church, of theology, of sermon? The good news is that the Uniting Church is already acting on this abundance mindset. And so I want to give you some examples of what this looks like in the Uniting Church, because I think they're really, really great. So the Uniting Church having 2 distinct statements on the belief of marriage is abundance thinking. because it makes room at the table for everyone. The full embracing of the statement of the heart for our First Nations peoples is abundance thinking. The welcoming of people seeking asylum is abundance thinking. Acting on climate change by changing the way we meet our needs as a society to ensure the survival of the human race is abundance thinking. Often, faith and Christianity and the church can do a really good job of talking about Christianity as in a self-sacrifice kind of way. The Bible even tells us in the Gospels to follow Jesus is to deny yourself daily, take up your cross and follow him. And in Bonhoeffer's case, with the church in Germany, he was calling them out of their own capitulation to Hitler's rule. And he did that when he said to follow Jesus, part of following Jesus is a cost. There is a cost to discipleship. In the space of radical discipleship, we often talk about following Jesus as being about the denial of self. But I think it is more constructive for us today to think of and to talk about Christianity in a space of the fulfillment of self. I think there's a broader discussion for us to talk about what it means for there to be a cost of discipleship, and if in a space like Leichhardt Uniting Church, where there's a lot of young people and a lot of young queer people and a lot of young women, if you're a part of a minority group, the cost of discipleship is something that can be very easily apparent to you. But for the church to start talking about Christian community as a space for fulfillment and self-fulfillment in a place of belonging and a community, I think is a more constructive place for us to start. So I've talked about abundance on a macro scale. We talked about that last week in terms of environment and some eco-theology. But what does this mean? And I've talked about what this looks like for the Uniting Church, but what does this mean on a micro scale? What does this mean for us as individuals? Well, this is where Brené Brown is really helpful. So if anyone hasn't heard of Brené Brown, she's a Christian, she's a researcher, she's a social worker and a sociologist. And she's done 20 years of research on what she calls wholehearted living. And so I'm going to talk about some of her ideas about this. So an abundance mindset on a micro scale looks a lot like love of self, compassion of self, embracement of self as the starting point for the abundance of all people and the world. The good news is, like we found in the readings today, is that the Bible is full of messages telling us of God's love for us, and that we are all worthy of the blood of Christ. So love of self and compassion of self are biblical ideas. Brené Brown's research has measured that you can only love others as much as you love yourself. You can only be as compassionate towards others as you are compassionate towards yourself. Yes, burnout is real, the need for rest is real, and we see Jesus constantly do this for himself when he would go and withdraw from his disciples, and he would take time away from everyone. Inherent within love and compassion are boundaries and accountability. These things actually go together. They're not mutually exclusive. Because when we deplete ourselves for the sake of work or a cause or for university study, we are saying, this can't get done if I don't do it. And we're also saying, I am worthy if I complete this task. This is a lack of mindset compared to, I don't have to do this because someone else can. There is capacity that exists beyond my own. And we're also saying, I am enough. That always has to be our starting point. I am enough as I am. You are enough as you are. And boundaries allow us to say, in order to keep going, I need to rest. And in the case of Sabbath economics, it's a matter of saying, in order for the land to keep giving us what we rely on, the land also needs to rest. And when we do that, we come back to the original purpose that God has laid out for us in Genesis, that the earth is a precious gift, abundant in life, that is to be enjoyed by all of creation. Love of others, love of the world, love of the environment has to start with love of self. And this is a biblical idea. Love your neighbor as yourself. You cannot love your neighbor if you do not love yourself. Inherent within true compassion is accountability, because when keeping others accountable, it is about addressing behavior and not attacking the identity of the person. And in the moments when we ourselves are held accountable for our actions, where we feel vulnerable, these moments can be transformative for us, where we can learn and grow and find meaning and purpose. The problem is that we live in a culture that sucks at doing this. Living into an abundance mindset is part of a recognition that we all get caught up in culture and in systems that oppress people. It's countercultural. Capitalism demands that we be competitive and that we win out over each other. But abundance says it doesn't have to be win-lose, we can win together. Abundance thinking and being resurrection people calls us to be creative, have imagination, and to live into an alternative. So I want to give you some more examples of this. When FDR introduced the New Deal and Social Security in the United States, when Gough Whitlam introduced free university, when Bob Hawke introduced Medicare, when our First Nations peoples released the Uluru Statement, when Angela Merkel shut down all of Germany's coal mines, when Kevin Rudd said climate change is the greatest moral challenge of our time, when Bernie Sanders says we will cancel student debt and introduce Medicare for all, when Martin Luther King said, I have a dream that one day people will be judged by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin. All of these are living into an abundance mindset. They are visions, they are imaginative, and they are creative. It is active belief that there is in fact room enough at the table for everyone. It's not passive. It's not just saying that there is room, but it's actively making room. So I'm going to finish today with a prayer that's called On Generosity by Walter Brueggemann. So Walter Brueggemann's a theologian, if anyone hasn't heard of him before. And this is what he writes. On our own, we conclude, there is not enough to go around. We are going to run short of money, of love, of grades, of publications, of sex, of beer, of members, of years, of life. We should seize the day, seize our goods, and seize our neighbour's goods, because there is not enough to go around. And in the midst of our perceived deficit, you come. You come giving bread in the wilderness. You come giving children at the 11th hour. You come giving homes to exiles. You come giving futures to the shutdown. You come giving Easter joy to the dead. You come fleshed in Jesus. And we watch while the blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, the poor dance and sing. We watch and we take food we did not grow, and life we did not invent. Future that is gift and gift and gift, and families and neighbors who sustain us when we did not deserve it. It dawns on us, late rather than soon, that you give food in due season. You open your hand and satisfy the desire of every living thing. By your giving, break our cycles of imagined scarcity, override our presumed deficits, quiet our anxieties of lack. Transform our perceptual field to see the abundance. Mercy upon mercy, blessing upon blessing. Sink your generosity deep into our lives, that your muchness may expose our false lack, that endlessly receiving we may endlessly give, so that the world may be made Easter new, without greedy lack, but only wonder, without coercive need, by only love, without destructive greed, by only praise, without aggression and invasiveness, all things Easter new, all around us, toward us, and by us, all things Easter new. Finish your creation in wonder, love, and praise. Amen.